Richardson area, what to expect, how to prepare, and how to help. Excuse me. My name is Brenda Boston. I'm currently the president of the League of Women Voters of Richardson. The purpose of the meeting tonight is it's an educational meeting to help residents of Richardson, the RISD, and surrounding areas learn more about how to be ready for and help out during emergencies. If you're interested in joining the league, we have membership forms on the back table, and we'd love for you to pick one up and be a part of us. You can also go on our website, and there are forms there that you can fill out. Tonight's forum is being videotaped, and we hope to have this video available in its entirety on our website, which is www.LWV-Richardson.org. So if you want to go back and listen to what happened tonight, you can do that. Or if you know someone who was not here this evening, you could tell them that it is available for them to watch. In order to have enough time to cover all the information our panelists over here will be discussing tonight, we've included their biographical information about our moderator and the panelists on the back of your program. The moderator for tonight's forum is Lynette Greenhaw of the Richardson ISD Board of Trustees. Please help me welcome Ms. Greenhaw.
Thank you, Brenda. It's really nice to be here this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to just review the format for this evening. First, as always, we will ask you if you have a pager or a cell phone or anything that beeps or makes noise, if you would silence it. We'd appreciate that. Flash photography is also not allowed during the meeting. It can be distracting to our speakers, so we would ask you to refrain from that also. If you have a question to ask the panelists, please write it on a card. If you need a card, raise your hand, and there at any time there's a teller that will move around the room and either bring you the card. We ask that you put one question per card, and please, if you could, write as legibly as possible for our folks that are going to be sorting them out. Your questions will be asked at the end and addressed and it can be directed to either one or all of the speakers. We also have some questions that were submitted by email prior to the meeting, and they've already been transcribed to cards, and they will be given the same consideration as those that are collected here this evening. When you have a question on the card, just raise your hand and a teller will come by and collect it, and they'll bring it back here to the screener's table for us. The questions will be screened at this table beside me. They are volunteers from the League of Women Voters, and the reason that they're screening them is to just avoid repetition and also any inappropriate content or things that are not directed to our subject this evening. They could also be combined or edited in some way. So now let's get to the meat of our program. Our speakers tonight are Misty Gardner, who is the Emergency Management Coordinator for the City of Richardson, Luther Robertson, who's the Safety and Security Coordinator for the Richardson ISD, and Lisa Tatum, who's Senior Manager, Disaster Preparedness for Volunteer Now. As Brenda said, their biological information is on your program, and we hope that you'll take a chance to look at that. So we're going to jump right in. We've got some... No, let me back up. I think I turned 2 pages. No, I didn't. Okay. So we have asked each one of the speakers to address a couple specific topics for you that's in their area of expertise. And again, you can ask the questions at the end of the session if you'd like to. So we're going to begin, Misty, with you and from the City of Richardson, and we want you to address the topic of the role of government in emergencies and disasters.
Thank you for having me. Oh, is it Noah? I didn't know it was going to be on video. My partner back there, he's here, Scott Greason. Many of you may have seen him. Emergency management is one of those departments.
Misty, I think they're not hearing you, so why don't you bring that really close to you, and if so, you could hold it also if that doesn't disturb you.
Okay.
Check it again and see if that works.
Can you hear me?
Yes. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. I may have to get really close. It's just really awkward. Okay. So with emergency management, it's not so much if we're going to have a disaster or what that disaster is going to be is a big question, and we don't know where it's going to hit or how bad it's going to be. So when we plan for all hazards, regardless of what the most common things are. We try to hit every emergency function we may get. That being said, we know what the common hazards are. Severe weather, winter weather. Some people thought for a long time we didn't have winter weather in Texas. That's not true anymore. And we're not so sure we're not going to have it after spring break either. So we're just waiting. But for us, a measure of success is not so much did we have or respond to a disaster this year. It's if we responded, did we have the same problems that we had the last time? It's looking at everything that we do and trying to make it better, filling gaps. And that's where my role comes in. So with the Office of Emergency Management, we are in the background most always, and we prefer it that way. We don't like to be on video. Some of us. No. If our job is done and we are able to respond effectively, then most of the time people do not know we exist. We spend a lot of time in the public doing public outreach, explaining to people what we'll talk about later with how to be prepared for whatever type of disaster may hit. So what do I do day to day? Most people ask, well, do you sit around and wait for disasters to happen? What do you do if you don't have a disaster? No, that's not the case. Our departments, all of them have a city function, obviously, or they would not exist. My department is unique in the fact that it does run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's only 3 of us. So we are not in the office a lot, but we work a lot. We basically fill the void. Anywhere where there's a gap between departments, whether it's communication, resources, staff, we look to fill voids. We look for weaknesses, and we try and identify the solutions to fix those weaknesses. That's our main role. So when you start talking about what is the role of government disaster, it's a little bit bigger than just, the government comes in and does whatever. You guys know we respond. You see the fire department every day. You see the police department every day. But what you don't know is that there's a lot of very intense and detailed planning that goes on behind the scenes. The very first and most important plan that we develop is the Emergency Operations Plan. I did not bring it. It's really fat. It's about 5 inches thick. But it's very detailed, and what it does is it identifies all the emergency functions for all hazards that we think that we are going to face in the region, and who is responsible for what functions, and how we're going to perform those functions. Now, we know that no matter what we plan for, it's never going to work exactly like that. And we manage those expectations by being flexible. So we plan every detail to the most detail that we can, to the point where most departments really get tired of it. But we do that so that when we're going through a disaster, we've already thought about it. We know what kinds of things may come up. We can anticipate some of the problems we're going to have. And then we have already identified solutions to those problems, especially with regard to resources outside of our city. Where we get involved in response a lot has to do with when a local jurisdiction does not have the resources to respond locally. So they can do the initial response, but they don't have enough. So then we go out and find regional resources, other cities, other agencies, and if we can't find anything regionally, then we go to the state. So along with the city requirements that we have state and federal requirements. Again, a lot of it falls back to the Emergency Operations Plan. We have an advanced level plan for anybody that wants to know. We also have a mitigation action plan, which a lot of cities do not have. And what that plan is tailored to do is identify projects that we can participate in to help prevent or lessen the effects of disaster. Whether it's to try and prevent flooding in a certain area. Several years ago, if you look back 15, 20 years ago, we had a lot of flooding. We have a lot of creeks. And we love our creeks, but we had a lot of flooding. So our development services, capital projects people did a very fantastic job, and they implemented some of those mitigation plans. And when they did, we very rarely, knock on wood somewhere, have a flooding issue from a flash flooding perspective. We watch it closely and we make sure, but those are the things we do to try to prevent. So that's another plan that we manage. We also have a continuity of operations plan. So if the city is impacted, we have already identified other places that each department can operate, other staff that can come in and help with their essential functions. And then finally, whatever their backup functions are, should their technology fail. So basically, how can we continue to serve our public even if we are impacted ourselves? Maybe we have half of our staff because of the flu epidemic. Those are the types of things that my department works on. Finally, we have basically, we take and we train each department on each of those plans. And we work to make sure that those departments understand how the other departments work so that they're not working in silos. Once we've done that, which is an ongoing process, we reach out and we build relationships. Those are the most critical pieces of what we do because we know that we can't be successful by ourselves. So we have a very active relationship with our school districts. Luther and I have known each other for a long time. He looks the same. I get a lot older. But we know each other on a first name basis. The school districts, I work with Plano ISD as well. We have a very active relationship with both Dallas and Collin counties. We have local planning partner teams. One of them has to do with accessibility issues in planning. If any of you are interested in serving on that or think that you could provide us some input, that is where we sit down with people that may have accessibility issues in the city, and we ask for their input on certain areas of the emergency operations plan. We also have partners in planning team, which is made up of the retirement facilities. So part of our role is that we review plans by schools, retirement facilities, and they bring their plans to us. It's part of their auditing requirements. We review their plans, we identify weaknesses that we see, and provide recommendations for them. So that group is a more proactive group. Instead of responding, they give us a plan and we respond back to them, we try and invite them and engage them ahead of time. Give them the lessons learned. So where do we fit? I don't know how to answer that question other than the fact of all disasters start locally and end locally. So we know it's going to start here, and at the end of the day, we're the ones that are going to be here. So we want to make sure we provide the best service that we can, just like any other city, I would imagine. But I know in this city, people take it more to heart. And there's three main lessons when we're talking to the public that we like to focus on. First of all, be realistic. Second of all, don't be part of the problem. We'll talk about that. That sounds terrible. And then take action. With being realistic, it's not realistic for me to plan and assume that we won't have a disaster and I'll never lose any life or property from a disaster. If we have an F4 tornado that comes through our city, we are going to have property loss. There's not one thing I can do about that. I can impact, however, how our departments work together, how we respond, and how quickly we can activate. First come, first serve. Most people think the fire department, they're going to roll up and the first injured person they see, they're going to stop and help them because daily that's what they do. But an example that recently happened in Rowlett, and this is just to make sure that you can be realistic about expectations. They had a lot of trapped people in Rowlett because of structural damage and debris. So the fire department was finding people. And what people didn't understand is that when they said, "Are you injured?" and they said no, they said, "Okay, stay right here. We'll be back later at some point." So they kept going. And this may be the case if you're injured. They may have a school down the way that they already know got hit. And while they're incredibly concerned about each individual citizen, they have to do and triage most good for the most people. So if they have a school down the road that they know has kids in it and it's been hit, they may bypass you. So if you're waving at them, they probably saw you, but they may have something else that they're going to. So just limiting the expectations. Another piece of that has to do with our response times. I would imagine that most of you, if you call 911, you're going to expect that they're going to be at your house in 3-4 minutes, less than 5. And that's the average for our city. It's excellent. But I don't care how good your fire department is. We have, every shift, we have 6 engines, 1 heavy rescue, 4 ambulances. Starting at the end of the week, there'll be 5. 5 ambulances for 100,000 people. So, do we manage our calls every day? We absolutely do. And one way that we do that is we anticipate our issues. We have mutual aid agreements with other jurisdictions where we can help each other, again, building on those relationships. We work with agencies within the region to make sure that we all work the same, that we are consistent with our behaviors. We have automatic assist agreements. If you will talk about Garland and Dallas, or think about Garland and Dallas for a moment, we have automatic assist agreements with them. Whichever agency can get there the fastest in those particular areas of the city, that's who responds. So very, very developed relationships, if you will. But if a disaster occurs, that 5-minute ETA is out the window, and there's nothing they can do about it. They still have 6 engines for almost 5 ambulances and a heavy rescue at the end of the day. So we're going to activate all those mutual aid agreements, and when that's not enough, we're going to push out responses and requests all over the region, and when that's not enough, I'll push it up to the state. And we have set thresholds for requesting those resources to come and do the services that we would normally do. Debris removal. If we have a debris generating event, you are going to get very angry with me very quickly. And the reason is because we figured we have about a 12 to 18 hour window where everyone's happy. You know, they're heroes, your firemen, your policemen, they're heroes, you're happy to see them. After about 18 hours, you are tired of them and you are ready to get back to normal, and you do not understand why you can't get access to your property. So again, we want to be realistic. If we have to shut down a neighborhood because of a debris event, we have to think safety first. You may not have any damage to your house, and we still may lock you out for 3 days. So when we talk about preparedness, think about that. If you are evacuated, are you ready to evacuate your house? And if they tell you to leave, are you going to think about taking your pet? Please do, because you may not get back in. Another issue that we saw is that neighborhoods, Luther lives in Rowlett, few streets over is demolished, their street is fine maybe. So what do people do? We're curious individuals, right? So we go and look at the damage because we want to help people. Well, then they got locked out of their neighborhood that wasn't even shut down because of other areas that were shut down. So you can see how people would get very frustrated very quickly. I don't even have any damage, but you're keeping me away from my property. The other issue with debris is that it makes big piles, and they're ugly. But when FEMA comes to do assessments, and there's a very specific process, it's a 2-phase assessment. We have to look at every property, and we have to be very specific. If we want to request a disaster declaration, which is how we get assistance to the city from the federal government, primarily in financial. So if we get a declaration, a presidential declaration, they will actually reimburse 75% of our costs, of eligible costs. The city is on the hook for the other 25%. So if we're at the point where we want to request a declaration, we have to do a disaster summary outline, which is an estimate of the number of households and the amount of damage that we have. All of that determines how much public assistance we have access to and how much individual assistance you have access to. So we want to be thorough. Part of that process is the bigger the debris piles, the better. They need to see that there's damage. If you bring in a nonprofit and they clean your slab, like some of them did in Rowlett, I will tell you, I wish that someone would come and clean my house like some of these guys did. I don't know how they did it. They made foundations look brand new, which was great for the homeowner and would have been great about a week later. But when FEMA came, they had nothing to judge. There was nothing to look at. So did that count as a house? No, it doesn't count. So we leave the piles, and the bigger the better. The other thing is we will be very proactive with public information to you and tell you where to put your debris. Don't be part of the problem. At night, when you're angry with us, don't throw your stuff in the street again, because then we're going to have to come and clear your street again. People get tired of it being on their property, and we totally understand. But we want to be safe, and that's just part of the process. So understanding those processes. And finally, am I telling you not to expect good service? Of course not. It's just that where we plan and we work towards a goal, we're still going to end up at that same location. which is recovery. Our agency, our city, our citizens getting back to a normal lifestyle. How we get there, though, is nothing like we planned, and we know it. We just have to be flexible with the things that come up. So then finally, keeping it realistic, don't be part of the problem. We're going to talk about volunteerism, so I won't talk very much about that. But just for a moment, donations. Do not donate things during a disaster unless you have unless you have someone to give them to. Because that is very commonly known as the disaster within the disaster. It would take a full department to just manage the donations, and it does every time. Other cities. And then at night, cities have to haul it off to the dump because they don't want to offend anybody. People were very gracious in giving the things that they thought people needed, but in all reality, it's sometimes not what is appropriate for the disaster. We get lots of coats in the summertime. We want people to be gracious, obviously, and help. But when agencies like the Red Cross or a local agency is asking you or telling you that donations of funding are better, that's the reason. Because we can a lot more closely and a lot more quickly we can meet unmet needs. So don't be part of those problems. And then finally, and then I'll close with this, and I know I've probably rattled on way too long, but take action. When you know there's a problem and you have a solution, take action to fix it. Be personally prepared. You can't help us if you can't take care of yourself. We want you to be prepared first. And the biggest lesson with any public involvement, pass on communication. That is the biggest challenge we have. We may have the best message and the most important message to give everybody in the community, but getting it out there during times of disaster is very, very problematic. We have an emergency notification system that we use. If you're not registered for that, we're going to talk about that when we talk about preparedness. We have an outdoor warning siren system that we use. Some love it, some hate it. We can talk about why we use it and how we use it when we talk about preparedness. But when you know something's happening, you get a warning from the Weather Service, take action on the warning. That sounds probably silly to say, but I can't tell you how many people get injured because they hear the warning, oh, okay, there's a tornado, but it's probably not here. And then they just keep driving or keep doing whatever they're doing. Don't do that. And then pass the word on to your friends and your family and your loved ones and whoever else, your neighborhood. Because sometimes they don't know. Don't assume everybody around you got the same message that you did, especially after disaster. If we're giving you information about perimeter control or debris or whatever we're passing on, a boil water notice, for instance, make sure your friends and family found out about it too. So let's wrap it up with that.
Thank you, Misty. That's great information. We appreciate it so much. Our next speaker is Luther Robertson of their RISD, and Luther is going to talk to us about emergency planning for the local educational institutions.
Okay, I think it's first very important for y'all to understand how this got started. After the September 11th, 2001 attacks on the towers in New York City, the federal government mandated the development of emergency plans throughout the nation. In 2005, in the state of Texas, the 79th Texas legislature added section 37.108 on the books, and this education code required that every school district in the state establish a multi-hazard operations plan, and they had to adopt this plan and implement this plan. In March 6, 2006, the school district adopted this plan. Actually, the Board of Trustees with the Richardson ISD adopted the plan. Since then, our plan's strong. The thing about the plan is this: you don't just write it one day and stick it on your shelf. This book should be used probably on a daily basis throughout the district. This is a campus emergency plan. This campus emergency plan is campus specific. In other words, the administrator there on that campus knows the hazards and the risk of that neighborhood around that campus. For example, if you have a bank near a location, What is something that might happen at a bank? A bank robbery. Do you think that might be a threat to the campus? Of course it's a threat to the campus. Do you think we're going to lock down or lock out during that time? Yes, we are. And that's where we come into work, working with our other agencies. We have a close relationship with the other agencies, whether it be risk management. I've already been in contact with Misty today regarding the severe weather. I mean, it's 24 hours, longer than 24 hours, actually about 30 hours in advance. Scott Greason and her have sent this information to me so that we could send it on to our campuses. And saying that, all of our campuses do get the information directly from the emergency management. Now, in the city of Richardson, we are actually within 3 city boundaries. We're also in the city of Garland. We have 2 campuses there, 2 elementary campuses. And then we have numerous campuses in the city limits of Dallas. So I'm in constant contact with each one of the emergency managers. And basically on a daily basis, I'm in contact with the police departments and the fire departments. We could have a child fall on a playground and we have to call an ambulance. So, I'm alerted, typically I respond to those calls as backup. But in emergency management, you never operate in a vacuum. When I put this plan together, which I wrote for the district, it wasn't just me putting this plan together. I relied on emergency managers from the city of Dallas, from the city of Richardson, and also the city of Garland. So everything we do, we work as a team. The main focus of my job is to keep students, staff members, and visitors that come to the campus safe. And that could mean, for example, during severe weather, a lot of times we'll have parents show up and they'll want to remove their children during a tornado or severe weather warnings. And my thing is we have staff. The staff is there to get the children in shelter-in-place areas where it's the safest place for them. But then we have parents driving up there wanting to take the children home to apartment complexes which are made out of wood. And that rationale I don't understand that rationale. So I tell my administrators, when these parents show up, bring them in. They can stay at the campus, but urge them to stay on the campus. The adults are kept separated from the students, and we try to keep them safe. Now, some of the people will come in there and demand that you're removing my child, and that poses a problem because when you have 700 or 800 elementary students on a campus and they're in duck and cover, we cannot tell the person up at the front desk to go and find this child because it puts that person at risk. So we ask that the public use some common sense. I know during the last tornado, fortunately I was in Colorado, but my wife was at home. But people didn't listen to the radio. There was warnings that came out, for example, on Interstate 30 and also on George Bush Freeway to stay off these mile markers in between these locations. Did people heed that warning? No, they didn't, and it cost people their lives. So when these warnings are put out, folks, I'm telling you, they're there for a reason. And I actually called my wife from Colorado, and they were watching a Netflix movie, and I said, do you realize what's going on? And they didn't really realize what danger they were in. And we were very fortunate because that storm came within 3 blocks of our house. And there was houses over there totally destroyed down to the foundation. So we were very fortunate. But anyway, let me just go in now and tell you the goals of our emergency management plan. First of all, is to protect lives and property. That's the most important thing because we know our children are our most important natural resources that we have. And it's my responsibility to return that child and that teacher home each day the same way they came. I tell the teachers this a lot though. You can go home, but I can't help you mentally after you spend all day in school. But that's my responsibility. And that's why I keep this updated. Misty was mentioning a minute ago about the information that she receives from me. She gets information from each one of our campuses that tells her who to contact. It also has maps of the school, cut off emergency locations. It has a diagram, a Google map to show around the school. Because here's what happens normally in these mass shootings or shootings on campuses. What do parents do? They want to rush to the facility. Now, if everyone's rushing to the facility, that poses a problem. Because instead of the officers being able to handle the situation inside that campus, there's going to be a distraction outside, because what if there's major accidents near the location? What if more people come out there that match the description of the suspects that are leaving the location? So we ask that if there's an emergency, we will warn you, and the other districts are like this also. They will warn you where your child will be relocated to. And typically, each campus in the other schools, whether they be colleges or universities, UT Dallas, or Plano ISD, they have normally two relocation locations. One would be school affiliated and one would be non-school affiliated. It could be a church, it could be maybe a nearby grocery store that's gone into a memorandum of understanding that we might take children there during a situation. The reason, for example, we might not take children to another campus location is because that campus might be impacted, or if you bring a lot of distraught kids in there, it could affect that campus. But we would look at that, and the parents will certainly be notified where the children will be taken to. Another thing that's really important in my job is we do audits. We're required by the state to perform audits every 3 years on all of our campuses. We have 57 campuses in the Richardson ISD, and basically, actually, there's like 84 facilities, and we go through and audit all those. What we're looking at is the physical outside of the building. Then we also go and look inside the building. The physical outside the building might be me going up there and testing whether the doors are all locked. When I first came to the district 11 years ago, we had an open door policy at the front door. When you came in the morning to school, you could walk your child to the classroom. After I was here a couple years, it really concerned me because I would see some parents come in really angry at teachers and also angry at students. So we created what we call a hug zone. So we have what we call a lockout. All of our campuses, exterior doors are locked. And what we did from that point on is, other than the first couple of days, 2 or 3 days of school, we understand, especially elementary age children, that you want to walk your child to school, and we respect that. But after that, it's time to let us secure our building, because we have to know who is inside our buildings, because we are held accountable. We've added a Raptor visitor management system. Many of y'all that have children, you're required when you come onto campus, and this is a state law, that when you come onto a campus, you have to present a approved governmental ID, and we slide it through a card reader, and it scans that information, and it checks this versus against a sex offenders registry statewide and also national. So that's another thing, what we call a mitigation, because that would lessen the likelihood of a registered sex offender coming onto a campus. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, how often does a registered sex offender come onto a campus? Well, I can tell you at least 4 or 5 times a year. And it's, sometimes it's parents that have children on the campus. And then there's we have plans for them, what we do when they come in. We would not let them go into the interior of the building. Normally their meetings would be held in the front office. And we look to see what type of risk they are. Are they a minimum risk or are they a high risk? and they're coded by the state. So we monitor that. I could go on and on and on about the different plans. I want to tell you that I'm very proud of the program that I've developed here. One of the things that I developed here with the district is this, we have what we call a lesser card, and it's a lockdown, evacuation, shelter in place, and reverse evacuation card. And this is what teachers have on them, and they use this in emergency situations. Every staff member is required to have that. It's just like I was talking earlier, when I go to the campuses and pull on doors to make sure doors are locked. That's another piece of our mitigation strategy, because visitors to campuses should only enter through the front door. But we've over the past 3 years, we've added the Cisco phone system. Our teachers or our staff members can go to any Cisco phone inside that building, and there's also some handheld remotes. If there was an emergency, they know there's a specific 3-digit code they dial in that would send out an automated lockdown message, so that that information is given out instantaneously, instead of us having to get to the PA system and make a call for a lockdown. So that system's automated, and it ensures that our lockdowns are done a lot quicker. I think basically I've described our program. Like I said, this campus plan is given to the police on a flash drive. It's given to the emergency management on flash drive. They review the plan. If there's any issues or questions or updates, as soon as things are updated, we forward it to them. We do this every year. I quite routinely go through and update this during the school year. A big thing right now being tossed about is threat assessments. And that would be students who might harm themselves or others on the campus by making threats of killing someone. That's included in our campus plan. And that's what we call a best practices recommendation. So when we talk about threat assessment, we're not talking about profiling, labeling, or stereotyping students. What we're talking about is, if a threat is made, we have to look to see if that's a viable threat. Does that child have access to a weapon at home that he could bring to school? And oftentimes, we can handle it in-house by talking to the parent, bringing the parent up there. But still, if it's a threat, for example, on a computer at the school, and we don't know who it is, we call the police, they get involved, and then I've spent nights out with the police knocking on doors, locating students that have possibly made threats before. So, I'm like the city emergency response team, but there's basically one of me. Now, I do have a lady, Debbie Dutton, who's the Director of Student Services. She works with me quite closely, but everything that we're doing is for the safety of the campus, to mitigate property loss and those type of things. All right. Any other questions or any questions? I guess
we'll do that. We'll do that in a minute. So, Luther, thank you so much. Now, lastly, we're going to hear from Lisa Tatum, and she's going to speak to us about the topic of how you can help your community by volunteering during emergencies and disasters.
All right, let's see if this thing works. Thank you all for inviting me out. I appreciate being able to talk about disaster volunteerism, because it's something I'm very passionate about. There are two different topics that I'll cover first, and one is how to help and how not to help. One of the things that we actually spent a little bit of time talking about is people, whenever disasters occur, there's a part of individuals who you're going to want to help. You just know you're going to want to do something to assist somebody who's in trouble, and there are a lot of things that people can do, but thinking about it after something occurs is actually one of the worst times to think about it. The best time is right now. Knowing that you are a group such as you are, you're going to want to do something, and the best way to help when a disaster occurs is to get affiliated right now with an organization that does help in times of disaster. And I noticed that there's a wonderful handout here that describes a lot of the different groups that are in your community, in this community, that you can already get affiliated with and volunteer with. And actually, Jean, who invited me here tonight, we're both Red Cross volunteers. In addition to the work that I do with Volunteer Now, I also volunteer with the American Red Cross to help them. And I stay affiliated with them and continue to work with them because I really appreciate the work that they do and I have a very close relationship with them. Getting affiliated, what that does for you is it gives you the opportunity to know in advance how best to help. It also is a way for you to know that you are going to be of the greatest assistance, because the first people that are called upon during disasters by the emergency managers in the community are those people who are already affiliated and connected to those trusted organizations that are a part of the plan, actually. We talked about the opportunity for the community to that the community, if it's a large enough disaster, is required to pay 25% of the whole cost of a disaster if it gets to that level. Well, volunteer service and the efforts that volunteers contribute can offset that cost. And entire responses have had the communities offset the entire cost. For example, the Joplin tornadoes from a few years ago, they had a volunteer reception center, which I'll talk about here in a second, set up within 24 hours, and they offset the entire cost of the community because they utilized volunteer hours to do so. And by affiliating with an organization, finding out exactly how to help within those organizations and tracking those hours accordingly can offset and save your community money. And it's a very valuable thing. It has to be a very large disaster for that to come into play, but it's also very important for you to know how you want to help. And so, for example, if you're a person that's very passionate about working with animals and pets, volunteering with an organization that's going to help take in pets. And after this most recent tornado over in the Garland area, they had a lot of loose pets, and they had a lot of people wanting to assist, and a lot of veterinarians and that sort of thing stepped up. So if you're the kind of person and you know you're going to want to help with animals, get associated right now with those organizations in your community that help with animals, and that way whenever disasters occur, you can be a part of that. Other ways that you might get involved, if it's a large-scale disaster, or if you've been here in this community for any length of time and were here during hurricane evacuations, we house people who are from either from the Gulf Coast or even from other states who come to stay with us, and we host them and we take care of them, and we have volunteers that help with that. My organization is a part of a group that focuses on the part of the plan that includes feeding and sheltering people. It's called the Mass Care Task Force, and we utilize volunteers to feed and shelter people who either have been evacuated here, or even if there's a large-scale disaster here and we have to shelter a lot of people, we'll take care of them through that organization. So the partners of that organization are the Red Cross, who will do sheltering. It's the Salvation Army, who's going to do feeding, and you've got the food banks who are going to provide the food to do that work. So you could affiliate with us now and sign up to do that kind of work, and we can help you do that. How not to help. After a disaster occurs, we do have what are called spontaneous volunteers that show up to help, and those can be problematic because we don't know what kinds of trainings they have. A lot of them haven't gone through any kind of a background check. So they're generally put to work doing those things that don't require background checks, such as debris removal, that sort of thing. And if you are the kind of person that you know you're going to want to be of the most help, working with those organizations that are already doing things. And not just, not only working with pets, but if you have, there are organizations that work with, if you like taking care of kids and doing child care, you can volunteer with organizations that do child care. There are organizations, there's a great organization that started working in the information and technology space. If you're an IT professional and you'd like to work in that space, you can volunteer with them, and when a disaster occurs, help them with setting up emergency communications and Wi-Fi and that sort of thing. So there literally is something for everyone that can be done in disaster. And if you try looking right now, and I love the resource sheet that was put together just because it has so many different organizations. And I work with an organization that tries to match volunteers all year round, but when a disaster occurs, my shift focuses to how can I best help the emergency managers manage those volunteers and put people to work. And what we do with those spontaneous volunteers, those people that decide when a disaster occurs to just show up, is a process called a volunteer reception center. And that process looks like opening the doors to individuals to come in, they sign up, and then they're matched up with positions that are available in the community. A lot of that's debris removal. Sometimes it's that mucking and gutting and cleaning out homes that hopefully after the FEMA assessments have been done. And taking the opportunity to go to a volunteer reception center. It's a lengthy process, it's time consuming, and can be a little bit frustrating, and if you're already affiliated with an organization, you kind of skip right over that. If you've got the training and the background to do all the things that are really necessary, because that's another thing that training and that affiliation does, is it gives you access to where the needs are the greatest when a disaster occurs. There are also local organizations, if you happen to be an individual that likes to work with handheld radios, they have a group that does that. You can also volunteer within your community in the police department and the fire department and affiliate and go through training with them. And that can also make you more valuable within your neighborhood if something does occur, that you can already know a little bit about how to best work with the police department and the fire department. And I can't say enough about trying to seek training, trying to seek ways in which you yourself can be more ready to respond. The preparedness thing that Ms. will talk about just a little bit is hugely important, because you're going to be of greater service to other people if you yourself are prepared. If you've taken care of yourself and your family, then you can go and be of use to other people. And that's it.
Lisa, thank you. That's great. We're going to turn back now to Misty Gardner, who's going to speak to us about personal preparedness for you and your family.
Hello again. We actively, like I said, do outreach. So a lot of this, if we've already been to your homeowners association, can't even open my own bag. They're good bags. This is the same information, and it's funny because we get a lot of comments. Do you have anything new from last time? It's the same thing. It's all the same steps. How we showed you may be a little bit different. So what we focus on, we use the READY program. It's a national program. It helps us to spread a consistent word. And it's 3 steps. It's build a plan, build a kit, and be informed. And building a plan is the first section. And obviously when you're building a plan, you want to think about your entire family, your entire circumstance. What do you have to think about? Do you have medications that you need to think in terms of, am I going to be able to get a refill? Do you have documents saved? Do you have a copy of your prescription? Huge problem. You lose your medication and you don't have a written copy of your prescription. It's a lot quicker to get you a replacement medication if we have a copy of that original prescription. Simple things, insurance policies. Making sure that you have coverage, but making sure you have access to your documents also. Do you have a list of all the things that are in your house that are of value to you? If you don't, make it now. It's a lot easier to make it now than after a fire or after tornado damage or what have you. And not only are you distraught about what just happened, but now you're having to sit there and think about all the things that matter to you, but from a value standpoint, are going to determine how much money you get back from the insurance company. And we want you to get as much as you can. Flood insurance. Do you have flood insurance? Most people don't. Because, after all, it's probably not going to flood here. That's what we always hear. Flood insurance is one of the things that's not very expensive, and it can make a huge difference in how much you're able to fully recover after an event. Another thing on the planning side, and it's probably the most critical piece. Again, it kind of falls with that communication piece and building those relationships, is if you have a family member that goes to school or goes to daycare or works at a certain building or whatever, do you know the emergency processes for that facility? Because if you don't, you're going to be part of the problem. Just like Luther talked about, If you understand that the school on a lockdown is not going to release your child, and that you need to be prepared to wait for information on where you need to meet your child, that's the best, most effective way to get there. Plan how you're going to get information. How do you get information? How do you get weather information? There are so many sources. I could talk all day about just where to get. The list of apps is ridiculous. So find what you like. It doesn't matter which one you use, but plan how you're going to get the information. And finally, communication with your family. Don't assume you're going to be able to use your cell phone. You will not. It will be a miracle almost if you can use your cell phone. Have a list of handwritten numbers that you have that you can just pull out of your pocket. Because if your phone dies or whatever, you want to be able to get access. Also, have an idea. Have someone out of town that you can call. If we have a local disaster, you may not be, our switch gets overran. The phones are down here. The phones are fine in California or even Canton or wherever, somewhere out of the Metroplex. More than likely, you will be able to make a long distance phone call. You just can't make a local phone call. So that type of planning is what it's referring to. So building a kit, I'm not going to go into all the pieces that need to go in a kit, but if you are a pet lover, make sure you plan for your pets. Leashes, water bowls. It's hard to get a dog water out of a water bottle. I've seen people do it. But prescriptions, again, having extra medications. Basically what we tell people is you build a supply kit that will allow you to be self-sufficient for 3 days. With water, as an example, we say 1 gallon per person per day. Okay? So 1 gallon per person per day. So if you're a 4-member family, that's 12 gallons of water. I know, it takes up space. Do it anyways. Best thing about kits, for things like perishable or non-perishable food items, water, rotate those in. Do it a little bit at a time. So when you go to the grocery store, buy 2 gallons of water. And when you come back to your house, take it to your supply area, put that new water in your supply area, and use 2 from your supply. Things, just simple things like that. And then finally, get involved, be informed. You need to know the systems that are here. So we get a lot of questions about the outdoor warning siren, why we activate it, what it does, what I want you to do when we activate it. We get people that say, oh, thank you for activating that. It was very helpful. And we get people that cuss at us for activating it. Literally cuss at us. So why do we activate it? Typically, we activate it for severe weather. Okay? Severe weather that is either tornadic in nature, so a tornado warning that is going to impact the city. Does that mean there's going to be a tornado in the city? No, but I'm going to activate it anyway because if the Weather Service thinks it's close enough to issue a warning including our city, I'm going to activate it. Where we fall into trouble is an instance like we had last week. Last Wednesday, we had a hailstorm. Okay? Our threshold for hail is 1 1/4 inches. Okay? Is that a P or a quarter or a $0.50 or what? For us, it's a $0.50, right? So the difference between a tornadic event and a hail event is that, one, if it happens at night, am I as concerned about activating the outdoor warning siren? No, because most of you are inside. But we still look at it. With hail, it needs to be confirmed. And with this hailstorm, we didn't get good confirmation until after the fact, which would have not made anybody happy if I would have then activated the sirens. It didn't have a purpose. Okay, so the Noaa weather radio is the best source of information for weather. We are not the primary notification for weather. The Weather Service is. We get direct information from the Weather Service. It is in real time. It is constant. We know them face to face, just like I know Luther sitting here. They even know our personalities, which is a little bit scary. That's how close we know them. Okay? I say that to say this. Yes, we have warning systems that we manage. The outdoor warning sirens, the notification system, which we do not use for weather. We'll talk about that. But get your information from the source, the Weather Service. Noaa weather radios are inexpensive. You can program them for your specific county, unfortunately. That'll get better, but right now it's by county. Definitely program it. If you don't know how to do it, bring it to our office. We have programmed hundreds. Because I promise you, if you buy one, you will have good intentions. You will plug it up, you will put batteries in it, you're good to go. In about a week, you're going to throw it in the garbage because it is going to go off nonstop. You have to program it for the area of interest to you. So we can help with that. So make a plan, build a kit, be informed. Be able to be self-sufficient for 3 days. Know your information. Know where to get your information. Finally, the notification system, the last system I'll really talk about. We use the emergency notification system not for weather. A lot of negative feedback on that, but let me explain why. If we have a tornado warning that has a 13-minute average, that's typically what the warning time is, which is a heck of a lot better than the 5 minutes it used to be. 13 minutes is great. 13 minutes doesn't give me time to call 100,000 people. It gives me time to call about 20,000, and the other 80 are going to be incredibly upset because I've just pulled them out of shelter to answer the phone. Right? So it's not useful because it's too fast, and I can't ensure that I'm getting the message to everybody. So we use it for things like missing children. We use it for things like incidents at the school if Luther needs us to activate it. We have a suspect that's dangerous in a neighborhood, and we want you to know if this person knocks on your door, it's a problem. Don't answer the door, call the police department. We've activated for missing elderly people. We had a gentleman that was at a retirement home, and he took a stroll, and they lost him. He lost himself, whatever. So we activated for that. Those systems are good for that. Local disasters, local situations in a very localized area. That's what we use it for. You can register for that system. All landlines are already in the system, so it'll call if you have a landline. If you have cell, email, or text that you would like, registration form. So at the back, what you have is a document bag to put all of your key documents in it. It has a little checklist for you to remind you of what might need to be in here. Then it has a list of all, it's really small, so we actually have big ones too. If you want one of those, just let me know. What this does is it talks about all the steps I just talked about. And it actually gives them to you in detail, very easy to follow. You just go straight down the list. Then the other side is about emergency notification and all those systems we just talked about. There's a manual sign-up form for the system. And then on the back, it actually gives you other information. So if you need to turn this in, just let me know. We'll provide this to you, but you can actually register online. It has a supply kit for how to build a kit. It actually has a step-by-step communications plan. And then also back on the back table are these things. They're called card magnets or magnet books. And what they have is very specific information about the hazards that we face in our city, programs that we have, both police, fire, public services, and the emergency management office. It talks about the Noaa weather radio. It gives you directions on how to shelter in place. And again, this is all available in large print as well. It's also very useful because it has a communications plan that you can fill out. And then it folds up card size and it goes on your refrigerator. So feel free to take any of that and as much as you want. If you have family members or what have you, that's what we have it here for. So that's just most importantly, take action. Do it. Don't talk about it. Because talking about it doesn't fix it. So.
Terrific. Thank you, panelists, so much. That's all very, very valuable information. We do have a series of a couple short questions that we thought were general ones enough that we wanted to ask you all to address. I may pick one of you to address it to, but feel free if the rest of you have something to add to it. So Luther, you really addressed this, but I just want to come back to it quickly. What should you do if a severe warning is issued just before the kids are expected to be picked up from school? You talked about it in general, but that window right when they're getting ready to be released is a specific time that we'd ask you just to address again.
What we recommend, and what the police also recommend, if it's a lockdown situation, we ask that you wait. And what we will do is notify you. We will send out emails, we'll send out text messages, we'll contact you via phone message. But we will send messages out if there's something that's going to affect your safety, because the worst thing that we could do is not notify you if there's a situation. For example, I discussed it earlier, a bank robbery in an area. But you need to be notified of that, because you don't want to come rolling up there and have someone pull a gun on you. So we would make a notification as soon as we got that information to put it out. And once the situation was under control, we would be in direct contact with the police, a supervisor. And once that situation was under control, then we would send you a message. It's all clear. You can come and pick up your children. If it's severe weather, a tornado warning, it's not prudent for you, and it's not prudent for us to really put kids on a school bus. I don't know if y'all have seen any of these recent photos of, there was a tornado in Missouri a couple of years ago, and just seeing the film footage of what it did to a school bus that came back to the campus where they were able to get those children back inside the school, it tore that bus to pieces. So we're going to ask again to wait and not come to the school. Now, we have PACE after-school programs on our campuses, and we tell people this: if there is severe weather and there's a tornado warning, do not come and get your children. We will stay with your children. We will not release them. We will hold them there until the severe weather is over, because we don't want to put you in harm's way rushing from Irving or wherever you work to come to the school to rush and put you in harm's way in case you happen to be in the pathway of a tornado or some type of severe weather. We will not do that. We will hold your children. Our staff members know that their responsibility is to care for those children, and that's what we're going to do. So please wait until you're notified to come and pick up your children. And if you do show up, we're going to, if we're in a duck and cover, we may not answer the door for you. You might see a lockdown sign on there that the police have notified us that it's a lockdown situation, so we may not be able to respond to that door, because there again, we cannot put our staff members' safety in jeopardy because someone not using good common sense. And I'm not trying to be harsh about it, but I have to look out for our staff member and our students that are in that facility. If there is someone by that door that it's safe enough to let that person in and we can relocate them in the building, we will do that.
Thank you. Misty, how about you take this one? What should I do if I hear sirens going off while I'm in the car? You touched on it, but give them real specific instructions about what to do.
So a car is difficult. What we say is you don't want to be in the car. It's the worst place to be. So we want you to pull over, find sturdy shelter somewhere, and go inside a building if at all possible. If you are somewhere where a building is not possible, there are some spaces in Texas especially that you can be driving, there's nothing. It is actually better to get out of the car, get in a low-lying area like a ditch, as long as it's obviously doesn't have water flowing through it. Lay down on the ground and cover your head. That's better than being in the car. So get out of the car, get into a sturdy shelter. If not, try to get into a low-lying area and cover your head.
Terrific. So Misty, why don't you tackle this one too? What should I do if there's an evacuation order? Won't everybody be on the highway at the same time? What should I do? Where should I go? How should I respond?
So evacuation orders are very unique in urban areas because we have multiple ways to get in and out. The most important thing in an evacuation order that occurs somewhere in a big city is to follow the exact directions that they give you. You may know that there are 10 different ways that are better to go to get out of your neighborhood. Go the way the police department and the fire department direct you, because they're probably directing you away from a hazard. We get a lot of questions about, do you have specific routes? Why can't you just tell me what the evacuation route is and we'll go that way? We have plans that zone the city in 6 sections and divide you off depending on where the hazard is and what type of hazard it is. I can't possibly teach all of you all of those. So what we do is we make sure that the staff know them. So the fire department, the police department, they know them well. And based on that hazard, they will direct you away from the hazard to the quickest outlets. So egress-wise, when we were trying to get people out of the city, They have full authority to change directions of highways, roadways, what have you, and they will do that if they have to. So our goal in evacuation is that all traffic is one way. No one should be coming into an evacuated area anyway. So we automatically flip the traffic flow and we go directly out whatever direction and whatever route they give you, and all of that traffic will be going the same direction. Now, if it is a situation where it's a fairly large population, then let's say something terrible happened and we were going to evacuate the entire city. I hope that never happens. I'm retiring if that happens. We would use all 6 zones. That's what they're built for. And we would build routes out of all 6 zones going in completely opposite directions away, because if it happens like that, it's in the center of the city somewhere. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. So we would use all available routes to make sure, and still use the one-way traffic to get people out and keep you from being in traffic. A lot of people see pictures like from the coast. They have, why can't you just have evacuation routes like that? Unfortunately, all my hazards, the main hazards, don't come from one direction, so we don't get to do that. But that is also what prevents us from having the gridlock that they have. So that's how we do that.
Thank you. And these are the questions that have been submitted by our audience or either online ahead of time. I will just give you the question and you're all free to answer it if one specific is to you. Feel free. Does the City of Richardson have a Community Emergence Response Team, or Cert, I believe is what it's called? If so, do you, and if not, why?
We do not. What we have, so Cert is part of a bigger Citizen Corps umbrella. And under Citizen Corps, we have 2 other programs that we support. Volunteers, now my mind just went blank, VIPS.
Volunteers and police.
Thank you. Volunteers and Police Service. And then we also have Fire Corps, which mostly serve as our fire rehab units. We support volunteers and activities with those 2 groups, and we support the UTD Cert team. If we had our own Cert team, it would be counterproductive with the other groups, and it would be counterproductive with the UTD group. The other reason is because, quite honestly, there are trainings that are questionable, and we want to make sure that in a Cert team is meant to do one thing, and it's meant to be the first responders to a location, neighborhood, what have you, to help. We have a set structure to do that and serve that function. So again, having a Cert team is counterproductive. And the trainings that are very technical, cribbing, structural collapse, rescue, I don't want you doing that. There's reasons those guys have years of training. Let's let them do that. And I just personally think that it puts citizens at risk. So I'm not saying that Cert programs are bad. They are all incredibly helpful, and they were incredibly helpful with the last tornado. It's just that with our city, for the particular function that we would use a Cert team for, it's covered by the other 3 organizations that we have.
This may, both of you, possibly Luther and Misty, can address this. UTD keeps getting bigger with more and more students. How does UTDs affect the city's emergency planning?
I just hate to keep talking. Okay, UTD, it could be a problem for us. So what we do is we proactively plan with them. We do have agreements with them of why we come on campus, when we come on campus. But the larger it gets, UTD is a city of its own. It has its own rules. It's a state facility. It's not a city-owned facility. And they have counterparts, just like Luther and me. They have a person that does nothing but Homeland Security, emergency, and security pieces for their campus. They do public education. They do all the same functions that we do. So the key to making that work is the communication and the relationship, making sure we understand how they are going to operate and they understand how we need to operate. So how we do that is we do training, we plan together, we train together, and we do exercises together. So every year there's exercises that we do, and an exercise is basically where you sit down at a table or you actually physically roll equipment and do what's called a full-scale exercise, or you can just do a drill. All of those things are built on a scenario. So they give you a scenario and you have to respond the best way that you would know how. And we do that on a regular basis. And as we identify issues and shortfalls and capabilities, maybe it's because we don't have direct access to a building. That's a common thing over there. They change roads all the time. It would be impossible for the fire department to know the best way to get somewhere. So having that active participation, the active training and practice is what keeps us to, basically prevents us from having that issue.
Thank you. You've touched on this, a couple of you have on this, but the specific question is, are there any good phone apps for use in an emergency? And maybe you can either just give them some general information or maybe point them to a place where they can find those.
I would like to promote the Red Cross app because it includes things like basic first aid. They have little games on there that can make it fun. And it also includes basic Red Cross information, like you can find shelters, you can tell people they have the safe and well information where if something happens, you can tell people you're safe, and that's a part of their app, and I definitely promote that one.
We actually use that for the same reasons, so that we can communicate to the public. So it's a good one.
Some of the apps you have to be careful with. I use one in the district called Voxer. It's free, VOXER. But the only issue about this app is, with these apps, is I found that it drains your battery very fast. So typically I won't use them. I have looked at the Red Cross app, and it is a good app.
Great, thank you.
Can I
Misty,
get real quick on
you
weather?
have another,
That's
please
okay.
do.
So WeatherBug, we have 5 active WeatherBug stations in our city, and all weather warnings, whether they're from the, let me start over. The National Weather Service, when they issue the weather warning, whether it's for here or wherever, it all goes out through that app. So if you've identified locations and you can identify all the Richardson weather stations, all you have to do is type Richardson. It's going to bring up a list, and you can click on them as your favorites, and then it will alert you to the weather pieces that pertain to you, the warnings. The other thing is the wireless emergency alert system. You don't have to have an app for this, but it is the newest emergency notification piece that the federal government manages for us. You do have to have your emergency notifications on your phone. If you're not sure if they're on, come and ask me. I'll look and tell you. If you got the Amber Alert earlier, they're probably on, but you have 2 sets you can turn on or off. The Amber Alert and severe weather. Now there's a whole list of things that it does for severe weather, but for us primarily tornado. And it's going to hit when they issue a polygon, they draw a picture or a shape around the warning area. If you are hitting a cell tower in that warning area, you will get that notification. And that's the best one, and it's not really an app, but it's part of your phone. It does have to be set up right.
Misty, you generally address flood insurance, but this is a specific question. How do I find out if I need flood insurance?
I think everybody needs flood insurance. There are lots of guidelines. FEMA has guidelines. There is a national group you can go to, and actually the resource is listed on our resource page that's in this packet. It's and it talks about flood insurance and why you need it and where are the prone areas. Now, we have a local, in capital projects, we have a floodplain manager. If you don't know whether or not you're in the floodplain, contact him. He's the quickest way to find out. But you can also pull up floodplain maps online now. They're actually open. So if you can find them, make sure they're the most recent ones, but you can get online and you can look to see if you're in the floodplain area. Some people will tell you that if you're in the floodplain, you need to have flood insurance. I will tell you that you need to have flood insurance anyways.
Do you have pipes in your house?
It can flood.
It will flood. I had it happen to me.
Yes. And some of your normal insurance policies now, it doesn't matter if it's an actual flood from a natural event or if it's something that occurred like Luther, they count that as flood damage and they will not cover it. It depends on your policy. Just make sure you know what it's covering.
So know your policy is really good.
It's so cheap to purchase it.
Terrific. This is a general question about the area. Why didn't this area get a presidential declaration for individual assistance after the December tornadoes?
Oh my gosh. That's like Pandora's box of put me in trouble here. Individual assistance is based on the number of major or destroyed damage. So there's levels of damage. and you have to have either major damage or your house has to be destroyed to count. So you count the households, and it's based off the number of households. You either meet the threshold or you don't. Now, everything is subjective, right? So an apartment complex, that becomes problematic, and how you count that. And every jurisdiction has a different process for obtaining damage assessment information. So when you apply, you're applying on the assumption that you have enough. And FEMA will come in with the assessment. They'll evaluate whether or not they agree that those houses that were impacted are either, yes, these are major or destroyed, or no, they're really not. They're not that bad. So if FEMA decides that, hey, you have 80 houses instead of 85, you don't meet the threshold, so you don't get individual assistance. It's purely based on the numbers. And public assistance is a lot the same way. We have to meet a threshold. State threshold is $35 million. If we are the only county that's impacted, we have to meet that threshold by ourselves, or we're not even eligible for a declaration. So all of those things come into play.
This is a question that's just interesting about our neighborhood. This kind of question says, I heard on the news that Richardson first responders were working in Rowlett after the tornadoes. Our citizens are interested to know, what did they do and how did they contribute?
That's a good question. So with Rowlett, we actually had, my office worked the entire time in Garland and Rowlett, the fire department, the police department, and our public works department. So I'll start with the fire department. The fire department assistants started with their normal everyday assistance. They started with their automatic assist, then they did their normal mutual aid like they always would. And then they only came in after that if they were requested. So for them, that was almost like a normal day, except for the ones that worked extra. A lot of the ones that are used to emergency operations, they know the structure, they understand the National Incident Management System, which is how we manage disasters. They go and they work for the other cities. No one has enough people. I don't care. You just don't have enough people. So a lot of that happened. The police department very specifically worked on the perimeter for Rowlett. So they were assigned areas, and then they went to those areas, and then they enforced whatever perimeter and curfews and all of that in that case, Rowlett Police Department put into play. Public Works. We have a unique situation in North Texas, and that is that we have what's called a Public Works Emergency Response Team. It's a cadre of individuals from local jurisdictions, including us. It's 40 member cities. We hope that it'll be a lot more now. And they offered over 10,000 hours, 10,500 actually, hours of service that, again, just like volunteer hours, can count towards their city numbers in equipment and responder hours. So what did we do? Our fire department, they did fire rescue. They did what they always do. They just did it for Garland and Rowlett. The police department, they did what they would do for us. They just did it in Rowlett. We did exactly what we would do here. We coordinated. We worked in the operations centers, both in Garland and, well, we didn't work in Rowlett this time. We have a regional emergency management team that does the same thing I just described for the Public Works Emergency Response Team. One person coordinates it. They put the request out. Whatever request comes from whichever city, all those assets go and they meet, and it's a very coordinated effort. The exact same thing happened with the emergency managers. All those emergency operations centers needed staff. So we divided it up and we took shifts and we worked. So that's how we did it.
Great, thank you. This is a very specific question. If a family has a tornado shelter and they go to that shelter during a warning or a tornado, how long should they wait to be assisted so that they know what to do next?
There's not a time frame, but that's where having a NOAA weather radio and taking it in your shelter with you is vital. Because if it's got battery backup, it will tell you when the all clear is. Typically, tornado warnings, if we're just talking about a tornado, they can last anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour. It just depends. A few years ago, we had our first tornado emergency for the region, and literally we were under a tornado warning for an hour and a half. There's 3 different tornado warnings, but it was a tornado warning for an hour and a half. Whereas the hail damage or the hail storm that came through, there were warnings and a lot of people took shelter from that. That 2 minutes and you would have been done. So it just really depends. That's why it's critical to make sure you have multiple ways to get information, whether it's on your phone, on a radio, and rely on those sources of information. That's what I would do.
After you blow the sirens, that's probably not the right word to say, but
It's okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, Lou 30 wants to add something to that.
Well, people are under the impression that they will keep activating the sirens. They do not do that. You know, once it's activated, they will not keep doing it over and over and over until that situation's over with. They'll do it one time. And there's not an all clear later on. So be aware of that, because actually I believe it takes those sirens 3 minutes to recycle, or is it 5 minutes?
Well, they when we activate them, they activate for 3 minutes, and then they're getting better. Basically, in a minute we can reactivate them, but it just causes confusion, is what we found. So we will activate them, and the reason we don't do the all clear is because it's one way. So there's no way for me to tell you this is the all clear.
And all it is actually a warning for you to come from outside to the interior of your home, and then that's when you need to switch on the TV,
Right.
the radio, or use your cell phone. I know in the district, I was telling you earlier about our Cisco phones. We actually have a panel that lights up and tells you that there's severe weather in the area, because it reads that off the computer. And we have generators that keep those powered up for at least 2 hours. So that's how we prepare. And it does replaces the Noaa weather radio, even though we have the Noaa weather radio on each campus as a backup.
Thank you, Lou, for clarifying that. That was my follow-up question about the all clear and what did that sound like. Now we know not to wait for that. Lisa, none of these questions really addressed anything that was in your realm, but is there anything you'd like to add based on what you've heard, or any of the questions? Is there anything else that you'd like to offer to our folks?
Well, I just think that because you are all, you're civic-minded individuals, or you wouldn't be here this evening. So thinking about how you're going to prepare, what it is that you need to do right away, thinking about those things that make you more vulnerable if you have kids, if you have pets, if you have prescriptions or medications that you take regularly, if you have medical conditions that require special equipment, starting to think now about how you can be prepared, but then also starting to think about, well, what you would want to do in an emergency situation, how you would want to help, and how you can be involved in those situations. And just get that information started today when there's not a disaster, because we don't know when something's going to happen. And now that you've heard this message and you all have information that other people may not have, go out and tell those people, like you're always promoting the things that you're promoting anyway. Promote emergency preparedness, connect people to the resources, provide them with the information that you've gotten tonight, because we're spreading this message, and we're always spreading this message to the schools, to the community, to people who volunteer. You guys are now responsible to do that out in your communities as well. So.
Thank you. So we'll remind you again that there are tremendous resources back there. Misty, may they take one for an elderly neighbor or someone that they also knows probably doesn't have access to one of those bags and that information?
You can take them all. You take however many you want, and if we run out, I will bring you some more. Can I add one thing about the notification system that I was remiss and left out? The notification system, we used to have something called the Special Needs Assistance Program. We ran it for years. It was a regional thing. Well, we found it hard for people. They had to register for the notification system, and they had to register for this thing over here. So we tied it all together. So if you have a special circumstance, whether it is a physical disability, or you want to tell the paramedics that you have high blood pressure and you take these medicines, or you want to tell them that you have a vicious dog that hates people that wear blue, that's good information. You can tell them that you have a tornado shelter and where it's located. So let me tell you what we do with that information. That information gets specifically added. We take it, then we add it into the computer-aided dispatch system, so that when responders are going to your house, anything that's pertinent, they will give that to the responder. Now, if it's personal information, they don't put it on the radio. They give it to them through it's called an MDT, but it's a mobile data unit. So they send it to them electronically through the call sheet, so that they have that information. So if they know you're diabetic and you don't come to the door, they're more likely to come in and get you. than thinking, oh, you're just not home and we're not gonna beat your door down. No, they don't leave you there, but we wanna make sure that we have the best ideas. Plus, it's a lot easier when you find someone that's unconscious if you already know. Here's some medical history that they gave us. So it gives them a starting place. But anything that you think a responder needs to know about you or your location, you can enter into that system as well. So.
Thank you. Well, as you can see, we are obviously very lucky to live in a community that has experts like this who brought this information to you, and also ones that work so hard to maintain the relationships that they have, which we've learned is really critical in this response. So I think we've reached the end of our time this evening, but please help me thank these panelists for the very valuable information they brought to us this evening. I'm going to turn it back over to Brenda as some closing remarks.
I just want to thank everyone for coming. I hope you gained some good information from this. And repeat again, don't forget there's information at the back. There also, if you would like to join the league, please feel free to fill out an application and let us know. This will be on videotaped. If you know someone who was not here and you think they might be interested, let them know. And again, thank you for coming. Good night.